So we're going to start at Old Trafford, where Arsenal and Manchester United kind of picked up where they left off from last season. For Arteta, a 1-0 win from a set-piece goal, and for Amorim, another home defeat. Bayindir, the goalkeeper, took the blame, but Amorim had a pretty strong defence of his goalkeeper in his post-match press conference, didn't he, Rob? What did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, we were both in that room for the post-match news conference. I thought it got a little bit spiky and a little bit tense at different spells. I mean, Amorim really is often like quite tense in post-match news conferences anyway. I think he's just so kind of wired from the actual game, and he's been made to kind of come out and face his questions so quickly that he kind of doesn't really let his emotions or let go of his emotions before he's sat down in the chair. And it's actually one of the reasons why he doesn't do proper post-match debriefs with his players in the dressing room, because he just feels he's too emotional to do it and leaves it till the next day. Obviously, he can't do that with a press conference. He's got to do it. He was obviously frustrated with the result. The mistake has cost him the chance of any points at all on the opening day. Perhaps wasn't expecting so many questions about his goalkeeper. Obviously, he's walked in there expecting some questions about Bayindir because it's his mistake that's cost United the game. But I don't think that he was expecting so many questions down that line and questions about whether he should have picked Tom Heaton and why he dropped Andre Onana. I actually think he thought that his selection process was quite straightforward, that Andre Onana was not fit all the way through pre-season. He did return to training last week, but I'd only had 3 sessions with the team. Altay Bayindir had played most of the games in pre-season, 4, I think he'd started out of the 6, and was the natural replacement for Onana once he decided that Onana just wasn't ready to play against Arsenal. So while he was prepared to kind of defend Bayindir and maybe explain what he thought about Arsenal's goal, I don't think that he thought that he was going to have to answer so many questions about actually his selection, which obviously leads to the press conference that we saw and him getting a little bit tense, a little bit angry. There was only one question really in the press conference about United's progress and how he thought they'd played. I think he perhaps was expecting the line of questioning to be more about that and how well United had done, rather than this kind of one selection issue that he had a goalkeeper and the mistake that led to Arsenal's win. So, yeah, I mean, positives for him, but again, you know, United have been beaten at home, and he's certainly not one to make a load of excuses and sort of say, no, we shouldn't be getting beat. He understands what happens when United get beaten at home, whoever the opposition is.
Mark, do you buy the argument that Onana couldn't have played that game? I mean, he was fit. He had. I mean, I know what Rob's saying, but he had trained, and he is clearly the best goalkeeper they have by some distance. Did Ruben Amorim make the wrong decision on Sunday?
He's the best goalkeeper by some distance. Well, I think United have got the worst 2 goalkeepers in the Premier League. I really do. I think you'll struggle to find a worse number 1 than Onana and a worse number 2 than Bayindir. We saw last season that neither could be relied upon. So he didn't have really much of a choice. I mean, obviously Tom Heaton has played in pre-season, but Tom Heaton if he's not 40, he's nearly 40. So he didn't have much of a choice. So he could have pushed harder for a goalkeeper in the summer. We know they've been linked with Gianluigi Donnarumma and Emi Martinez. So there's obviously interest in a goalkeeper, and they haven't sorted it out yet. So he had a choice, but not much of a choice. But I agree that Onana is a better bet than Bayindir, but not by much. But I think, you know, he's been there now. Amorim's been there at United for 9 months now. He knows what happens when you lose a game at Man United. It doesn't matter if you've had a positive performance. You will focus on the reason for the defeat, and the reason for the defeat was the goalkeeper. It was just, I don't think he was fouled. I've watched the replay quite a few times now, and obviously it's Saliba and Mason Mount that are wrestling in front of him, and Bayindir just kind of almost like walks into the physical confrontation. Saliba's not really pushing Bayindir out of the way. Bayindir is just all over the place. So that's an Amorim. He picked the wrong guy, but he picked the guy that he saw last season have bad performances at Newcastle, had a bad performance at Tottenham in the Carabao Cup. Yes, he played well in the FA Cup tie against Arsenal, but the reason why he's remembered is because he saved a couple of penalties, which, you know, any goalkeeper can save in a penalty shootout. So it's a tricky one, but I think ultimately Amorim should have pushed harder to get a goalkeeper in, a proper goalkeeper this summer, because you think about the successful teams in recent years. Jurgen Klopp pretty quickly got rid of Karius at Liverpool, brought in Alisson, transformative. Mikel Arteta realised that Leno wasn't the guy, brought in Ramsdale, realised he wasn't the guy, brought in David Raya, transformed Arsenal. And look at Pep, you know, he got rid of Joe Hart, brought in Claudio Bravo, who was a disaster, and quickly remedied it by signing Ederson. You need a proper goalkeeper. And Amorim probably knows that if he spends the season with Onana and Bayındır as his goalkeepers, United are going to struggle again.
Well, Rob, the obvious question then is, where are they with their search? I mean, we know they made the inquiry about Emi Martinez earlier in the window. There seems to have been a sort of cooling of the apparent interest in Donnarumma. Is that right? I mean, where are they at the moment with those two, and maybe a fresh target we don't know about yet?
Yeah, I mean, the situation with the goalkeepers now reminds me an awful lot of what happened when Ten Hag came in. When Ten Hag came in 2022, he identified very quickly that he thought he needed a new goalkeeper. And obviously David De Gea was the number one, but Ten Hag decided that he probably wasn't the guy and they needed a new keeper. Obviously, in that summer, as every summer, he had to work towards a budget. And instead of investing in a new goalkeeper, they decided to sign Anthony Casemiro, Martinez, Tyrell Malacia, because Ten Hag eventually decided that the other areas of the squad needed strengthened. He felt that he could live with De Gea for at least one more year, and hopefully De Gea gets up to speed with some coaching, and if not, they address it later down the line. Obviously, he didn't think De Gea got to that point where they could continue with him, and in the end, a year later, they signed Andre Onana. It feels very much like we're in the same situation, that Ruben Amorim knows that he needs to make an awful lot of changes to this squad. But this summer, he's decided that he wants to fix the attack and the lack of goals by bringing in Mbeumo, Cunha and Sesko. They still probably need a midfielder and they still need a goalkeeper, but they've obviously prioritised bringing in more goals and then look to address the other options. Now, I think there's a similar situation that Amorim will probably think that if they can't sign another goalkeeper in the last couple of weeks of the window because of the budget restrictions, that they'll probably do it in a year's time. Maybe United get rid of the players they don't want, the likes of Sancho, Garnacho, Anthony, possibly Højlund. Maybe they bring in enough money to go and sign a keeper. It's clear that they do think that they need a keeper, because United aren't knocking down the suggestion that they went to Aston Villa earlier in the summer and asked for Emi Martinez on loan, but just got told no by Aston Villa. They've cooled the links with Donnarumma. That they have gone to Donnarumma's camp and tried to explore what kind of financial conditions would be necessary to make that deal happen, but have just decided that it's not for them. At the moment, it looks more likely, if he is going to move to the Premier League, that it's going to be Man City or Chelsea. So I wouldn't rule out Man United signing another keeper, although Amorim told us both in that presser yesterday that he was happy with the three keepers he has. I wouldn't rule out them doing some kind of business if they can make it work within the budget, but that would mean getting someone to come in and make an offer, a substantial offer for Andre Onana to get him off the books, and also finding a keeper who they like, who they think can fit the way that Amorim wants to play. All of those things at the moment are up in the air. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Andre Onana stays and is Man United's number one for the entirety of this season.
It feels like this is going to become like Arsenal in the centre forward narrative all the way through. Man United in the goalkeeper, but we know that Arsenal have got a centre forward. Viktor Gyökeres made his Premier League debut yesterday. I must admit, I was watching at home on the TV, and I was surprised by how unconvincing he was. He looked out of shape to me, and obviously he's not had a full pre-season training. We have to give him that benefit. He had a difficult summer with Sporting Lisbon, but he just didn't look ready for the Premier League. So one game in, I know we're not going to start writing people off, but James, do you think that there's more to go with Gyökeres? Are you surprised you saw him on tour in the Far East? What are we waiting for there?
Yeah, so there's been a sort of, I think there's a slight difference between what Arsenal and Arteta would have you believe about Gyökeres and just what those of us who were on tour in particular sort of saw with our own eyes, really. And that's that, just leaving aside how good he is as a player for a minute, we've just got a sort of sense that I think I wouldn't say rabbit in headlights, but I think he's been a little bit surprised perhaps by the spotlight and the scrutiny. And he was kind of thrown into the deep end a little bit. He was obviously sat waiting for a while at Sporting, wasn't sure whether the deal was going to go through. I think the club thought at one stage that they'd have him for the start of the tour to Singapore and Hong Kong. They didn't have him when they left. There was then a sort of week or so of, will they sign him, won't they sign him? And then he flew to Singapore. I mean, this was a slightly sort of strange thing, I thought, at the time, really, is that they flew him into Singapore. So he came out and he sort of gave his, big hello to the crowd before the Newcastle game in Singapore. And then they had one day, sort of recovery day in Singapore. And then they flew to Hong Kong. You sort of think, well, did he really need to come out straight away and do that and be thrown in for that one session to then go to Hong Kong, and then Hong Kong 4 days, very intense. They had the one game, obviously the derby match against Tottenham. He played a little bit of that game, but he just, and we had some time with him at the team hotel, and he was struggling to get up to speed. You could tell that. And I had a lot of sympathy for him because, as I say, he was thrown in sort of into the middle of that tour, made that long, I think it's a 14-hour flight to Singapore, was there for, 36 hours, and then got on a plane, 4-hour flight to Hong Kong, 4 days there. As I say, we were at the team hotel for a while, and there were fans everywhere, kind of really scrambling to just get a glimpse or a selfie or an autograph with anyone they could find in an Arsenal shirt. And then, of course, they flew all the way back, and they had the 2 games, and they've gone into the season. So, I think he needs some time, definitely. And he did look a bit off the pace, and he didn't have a shot, which I was told by our stats team is the first time in more than 2 years that he's not had a shot in a league game. And he came off on the hour mark, looked as if he'd sort of run his race a little bit. So there's a long way to go with him. And also what I would say is that Arsenal have got to adapt, and they are planning to adapt their style to be a bit more direct, to try and get Gyökeres into the positions where he's strongest, which is running in behind, occupying the 2 centre halves. And Arsenal as a team didn't really get going on Sunday. They never really sort of got into their stride at any stage, really. And actually, when you could say it's a credit to Gyökeres to some extent that when he went off, their attacking threat was completely non-existent for the rest of the game. So, we can't judge him on one game, but hopefully that gives a bit of context in terms of just the behind-the-scenes stuff that he's had to deal with. And I think that's probably had an effect in not being able to hit the ground running so far.
James, I know that you weren't particularly impressed with Arsenal yesterday, as a lot of people have kind of said. That they had Gyökeres playing and Zubimendi, their 2 kind of main summer signings starting. Are you expecting there to be any more movement in or out at the Emirates before the transfer deadline? Is there any other areas of the squad that you think that Arteta is looking at and think I could maybe do with an upgrade there?
Yeah, yes. So there will be outgoings. There are a number of players who are available effectively. Leandro Trossard, Alexander Zinchenko, Fabio Vieira, to name 3. And I think if they can get Reece Nelson's probably another one. If they can get one or more of those out, then I think they could do another one in. They like Eberechi Eze at Palace, but from what I'm hearing on that one, it sounds as though Tottenham are ahead of them now in that conversation. Whether either club can convince Palace to sell is another matter, but it sounds from what I was told over the weekend that Spurs are now leading that race to sign Eze. So it's a difficult position that for Arsenal, because of course if they try and go again in the market and they go for Eze and they can't get 2 or probably 3 players they need to get out, maybe in that instance, then the squad suddenly looks bloated, and Arteta's worked so hard to get this sort of culture of togetherness and this spirit where everyone's involved. That becomes quite difficult to manage then when you've got sort of 2 or 3 players, maybe 4 players who sort of know that their numbers up, but they can't now go anywhere until January. So that's sort of where they are on the transfer front.
Rob, similar question to you. So far United's outgoings has resulted in a big fat 0 in terms of money brought in. Obviously Marcus Rashford has gone to Barcelona on loan, but it's not helped them with their ins and outs. So we know that Jadon Sancho's been interested in Roma, but he appears to turn that move down, which was a blow to United in terms of money coming in. Antony's still there. Tyrone Malacia's still there. Alejandro Garnacho, despite Chelsea's interest, is still there. Rasmus Højlund, who could get a move to Milan, but again, they don't want to pay what United want. So United needs to get players out before the deadline. We've got 2 weeks to go. Are they going to do it? Are they going to start dropping their fees? Or are they going to stick to what they want and be stuck with players until January that don't want to play?
And this is the problem, that there are obviously 2 areas of the squad that United probably do need to strengthen: the centre of midfield and a goalkeeper. But to do that, they're going to have to bring in money from those players you just mentioned. The issue with how United have handled this is that every club in the world knows that United don't want those players. Now, on one side of the coin, Amrin will say, well, not having Garnacho and Antony and Sancho and all those players on the tour of the US helped create a better bond with the squad that I do want. It helped improve team spirit. I was able to kind of create this kind of group culture while we were away, and it helped on that side of things. the flip side is that when they're all training away and every club knows that they're just not wanted, that there's no incentive for any club in the world to make any kind of realistic offers for these players because they know that United are desperate to get rid. So Chelsea and Garnacho, for example, everyone will know that Chelsea are interested in Garnacho and that Garnacho would prefer to go to Chelsea because he wants to stay in the Premier League. But United are asking of a fee of around about sort of 40 or 50 million pounds. Well, why are Chelsea going to come in and say, right, we're going to give you 40 million pounds for him when they know they could probably just sit there until deadline day and play on United's desperation and on deadline day say, tell you what, we'll give you 15 million to take him off your hands. How's that? And United then are going to have to make a really, really tough decision because Alejandro Garnacho, whether you like him or not, is not a 15 million pound player. But it's whether United can risk having him being there on September the 2nd, the day after the deadline, and carrying on this kind of saga into January and possibly into next summer. It's a really, really difficult position for United to deal with because obviously they want these players out as quickly as possible. They want any fees that they get in the bank because they want to reinvest in other areas of the squad. Everyone will know that they were looking at Carlos Balibra at Brighton, although that deal they think is out of reach for them this summer. They need money in to be able to reinvest in other areas of the squad. But as things stand right now, the clubs who are interested in the players that they don't want are just going to sit and wait to the last minute and hope that United drop their fees and drop the demands. And maybe on deadline day, they can get a bargain. I don't really know how United solve that issue because they've made it so clear that Amrin doesn't want these players and they're not going to get back into the squad or anywhere near the squad until at least after the deadline. So for the next 2 weeks, basically everyone's just kind of treading water. And this is exactly what happened with Jadon Sancho this time last year. Everyone knew that Jadon Sancho was surplus requirements, and it wasn't until deadline day, I think, that Chelsea came in and took him on loan right at the last minute. And right now, that is what United are facing for Anthony, Malacia, Garnacho and Sancho again.
Well, Manchester United, like everybody else, of course, chasing Liverpool, last season's Premier League champions. They kicked off with an impressive win over Bournemouth. I think we should just say, I thought Semenyo, the way he dealt with the racist abuse, and actually his public statement afterwards, it's just an internal credit to him and the character that he showed. And let's hope that the strongest possible punishment is given to the fan in question. But if we can leave that aside, Mark, and just talk about the game, I mean, did Liverpool impress you, or did they concern you with the way that they defended?
I think the latter. I think they set a high bar, so we have to judge them to a high bar. And I think obviously we know they're going to score goals going forward, but they were really kind of loose in midfield. And I think the problem that Arne Slot's going to have this year is how he can accommodate all the signings he brought in up front and how he kind of works out what to do in midfield, because Alexis McAllister was basically holding midfield on his own because he was playing alongside Dominik Szoboszlai, who his natural instinct is to attack. And obviously, after about 10 minutes, Szoboszlai was doing just that. So Liverpool had basically a front five. They had four at the back. They had McAllister holding the fort in midfield, and everybody else was running all over the place. Now, that was down to Ryan Gravenberch being suspended. Now, I'd imagine that Gravenberch was back into midfield alongside McAllister. That's the obvious thing to do, but I just wonder with so many attacking players to fit in whether Slot will do that and whether he will try and find a way to make it work when it might not work. I think obviously defensively they look a little bit suspect. I think we know that Canate had a poor game. Van Dijk was poor at the back as well. Now Liverpool have brought in Giovanni Leone from Parma, but he's only 18 years old. So there's a weakness in the defensive position for Liverpool. But the flip side is they're so devastating going forward that virtually every game they will score more than the opposition. But against the Arsenals, Man Cities, Chelseas, and perhaps the better teams at the top, that might not be enough. That might be the crucial element in Liverpool's game that makes them beatable this season, the fact that they can't quite control the games as they did last season. So I think what happens with Gravenberch is a big thing. It's the obvious solution, but like I say, they've got so many players in an attacking sense. They still want Alexander Isak, and if they bring Isak in, I just don't know where everybody plays. You look at Ekitike started fantastic. Mo Salah's got to play. If Isak comes in, that's the front three sorted. But what about everybody else? They've got a lot of options, and a lot of these players, need to play. Florian Wirtz. I didn't even mention Florian Wirtz, who's £160 million, and he didn't quite stand out. So they just got to get the balance right. But they scored 4 goals. Semenyo was fantastic. Scored 2 great goals, but Liverpool still fought back and won the game, and that's what they'll do. But there will be occasions when that isn't enough, and I think that will give hope to the Arsenals and Man Cities that they can actually overhaul Liverpool this season.
Well, you mentioned Man City, Rob. I mean, they were probably the most impressive team of anybody who's played so far. I mean, it's a big question after one game, but have we underestimated City a little bit? I mean, they looked pretty slick, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Really, really impressive. I think we said on the pod last week that, after what happened to them last season, and they've kind of a little bit of a disjointed summer with being at the Club World Cup, that no one really knew what to expect. Well, I know it's only one game, but they were absolutely terrific. And probably Wolves will say that it wasn't their best game, and they weren't in the form that they showed towards the back end of last season when they managed to survive relegation. I thought the one big thing that's for City was Reinders in midfield. We saw little glimpses of it at the Club World Cup. Just that willingness. It seems really simple, but that willingness to go from midfield and run beyond the striker, in this case Erling Haaland, and he just did it so many times against Wolves, and they just never picked up the run. There was one where he gets the ball from Oscar Bob and scores himself. There's another where he sets up Haaland's second goal, where he just runs beyond Wolves' defence, and it's a little cutback, and Haaland's there left with a relatively simple finish. It's something that City really, really missed last season. A lot of the attention on City's midfield was obviously around Rodri and what a massive miss he was, and obviously he is a massive miss, and City won't be properly back until he's back in a team and playing week in, week out. But they just looked so often last season like they had no energy in midfield. Everything was very sort of static. There was a lot of times where they were playing teams and they were just passing around that box and didn't really look like they were going anywhere. But they just, on Saturday at Molineux, they just seemed like they had so much more energy, and a lot of that was to do with Reinders' willingness just to run from box to box. And I've seen a lot of stuff sort of in the aftermath of that game saying that he looked like a younger version of Gundogan, and he does remind you of that in a little bit, that kind of ability to go from one penalty area to the other and not really look like he's breaking a sweat. And if he can add, I think he got 10 Serie A goals for Milan last year, and I think he was voted the best midfielder in Italy. If he can recreate those kind of numbers and get sort of 10 Premier League goals for City this year, that's a massive, massive boost and a massive upgrade on what they were able to do last season. There are obviously still issues that Pep will want to solve. There's a little bit of uncertainty at the moment around the goalkeeper. There still isn't a recognised right back in the squad. Rico Lewis played there on Saturday and did well enough, but the questions about whether he can last the entire campaign there. So there are little issues that Pep Guardiola will still want to solve. But in terms of, opening weekend and the teams that we saw, I thought that City were by far the most impressive of those teams that will think that they've got a chance of winning the title.
Well, honourable mentions, I think, for Sunderland in particular, who I thought were fantastic against West Ham and have completely vindicated my pre-season prediction that they're going to stay up. So that's all sorted. We can just tick that one off now. Anyone else, Mark, stand out for you this weekend?
Well, I also backed Sunderland to stay up, and I think on the basis of their, I think they're really well in the transfer market. The spending, they're pretty close to surpassing Nottingham Forest record. I think £142 million for a promoted team. I think they might actually break that by the time the window closes, and I think they've given it a real go. And I think the Sunderland atmosphere looked amazing at the weekend. They're a big club with a big fan base. It looks a really vibrant place to be right now. And I think, but the flip side is West Ham. I mean, I think you may also have tipped Graham Potter to be one of the first, if not the first manager to go. I know I did.
Yes.
I think that Graham Potter is not a West Ham fit. The fans aren't having him. I don't think he has the personality for the job. I don't think he's got the credentials for the job, to be honest. And I think that on Saturday looked to me like West Ham, a club that could unravel pretty quickly because they haven't made the signings they need to make. Obviously, Mikel Antonio's left because of a variety of reasons. But, prior to his accident, he was a big figure for West Ham. They lost Kudos as well. They shouldn't be losing 3-0 away to a promoted team in the first day of the season. If I'm a West Ham fan, I'm really worried. Now, I had Brentford to go down in my bottom three with Leeds and with Burnley, but I'll tell you what, West Ham could give them a run for the money if they don't realise pretty quickly that they've got a problem with the squad and the manager.
Well, time for a quick break now, but when we come back, we're going to discuss the hottest name in the transfer market, one Alexander Isak. So, plenty of good football on show in the opening weekend, but one game that wasn't so easy on the eye was Aston Villa against Newcastle, where the biggest talking point was the absent Alexander Isak. Mark, you've written a column about this. I remember Roy Keane saying, if you want loyalty, get a dog. Is that how you feel about this situation?
Well, pretty much. I mean, look, the way that Alexander Isak has behaved this summer, I don't think it serves him well, does it? There's a sour taste in what's happened there. He's not actually come out and said anything, but it's fairly obvious that he doesn't want to stay at Newcastle. He wants to go to Liverpool. But I just think the way that he's conducted himself is not great. But ultimately, loyalty in football is not a thing. You know, you could say, well, he's not being very loyal to Newcastle, but let's be honest. He signed for the club 3 years ago. In that time, he's helped them qualify for the Champions League twice. He's helped them win the first trophy for 70 years, scored a lot of goals, elevated himself to a level that Newcastle haven't been able to keep up pace with. And, you know, look at Newcastle's transfer dealings the last 2 or 3 windows. They haven't basically matched his ambition, I guess. So he's probably thinking, well, I've taken my game to another level. The club hasn't kept pace, so I want to go somewhere else and realise my potential as a player. And, you know, let's be honest, if you're in with a chance of playing for Liverpool right now, you've got a chance of winning everything this season. So I don't blame Isak for wanting to go to Liverpool. I do blame him for the way he's acting, but ultimately, loyalty doesn't matter because look at Man United. Rasmus Højlund is on his way out. He doesn't want to leave, but United have said, well, you know, you're not good enough for us. We want to get some money for you, so on your way. So where does loyalty go? Raheem Sterling at Chelsea last year didn't want to leave. He committed to the club for, I think, 5 years. They said, no, you're not part of our plans. Off you go. So, you know, footballers have a short career. Loyalty is what fans talk about. They get the tattoos. They say that a player who plays for the club should live and die for the badge. Well, it doesn't quite work like that. Football's a business. But the way that business has been done so far isn't great. But I just feel sorry for Eddie Howe because, you know, we've all dealt with managers in situations like this where a player wants to leave or they want to sign a player and they lie. Some managers lie and they kind of fob you off with answers that, you know, aren't true. I mean, I think Mikel Arteta's brilliant at it. I think Arne Slot's very good at dealing with questions like this. But Eddie Howe's been too honest. He's basically worn his heart on his sleeve. He looks really let down, really disappointed by the situation, but he's given too much away. I mean, I remember a classic case with Sir Alex Ferguson when they were trying to sign Robin van Persie at Man United back in 2012. And we had weeks and weeks of speculation. United denied. And we were in Cape Town in a press conference before a game on a pre-season tour. And 5 minutes before the press conference started, the Man United website put a story out saying Man United have bid for Robin van Persie, but the bid has been rejected. So we thought, fantastic, great line. We put it to Ferguson in his press conference, and he said, no, we're not interested in Van Persie. Nothing happening there. We said, Sir Alex, you just put it on your club website that you want Robin van Persie. And like the flick of a light switch, yeah, he's a great player. Hopefully we can get something done. So some managers have to play the game a bit different than Eddie Howe is playing at the moment. But, you know, feel sorry for the guy, but it's football. He knows the business. Alexander Isak knows the business. And I imagine by the time the window closes, he'll be a Liverpool player.
The situation reminds me a little bit of Harry Kane, actually, in that, you know, obviously Isak signed a 6-year deal. That's the mistake he made.
Yeah, too long.
And it's exactly what Kane did in 2018. He signed a 6-year contract before that World Cup, by the way, in which he went to win the Golden Boot. So he might well have ended up with a more lucrative deal if he waited a couple of months. But that deal meant that when Kane tried to get out of Spurs the first time, he couldn't do it because the club were in such a strong position. And Rob, I mean, do you think really? Think about Chelsea here, who've got players on 6, 7, 8, 9-year deals. But is the mistake that Isak's made is signing that 6-year contract? You know, there's been a lot of focus on his agent and the way that they've gone about trying to get him out of the club this summer. But actually, if you trace it back to that deal, should a player really ever be signing a 6-year contract if they've got the potential to become what Isak's become, or can we only say that with hindsight?
Well, I mean, players do it because they want financial security and they know that at any given moment they could have an injury that will end their careers and then no one's going to want to sign them ever again. So you can understand players wanting to sign these big, long deals, but they can't have it both ways. You can't sit down with the club and say, I'm going to take your 6 or 7 year deal because I want that financial security. But actually, if I do really well for 2 years, I want you to let me go really quickly and really smoothly because actually I want to play for another club and you know, get paid more money and win bigger trophies. You can't really have it both ways. And I think I'm surprised actually that there's not a release clause in Isak's deal. And I think that you're going to find going forward that there will be more release clauses included in these contracts because it gives players the security of the long contract, but also the kind of the power over their own futures. And they had this with Man United a couple of years ago where Paul Pogba was at Man United and his agent Mino Raiola at the time was really annoyed in different summers that he just couldn't get United to let Pogba go. That United said, well, there's no release clause. If no one matches our valuation, then you stay in put, and Paul Pogba didn't really want to be there. And actually, in the end, there were times where Raiola with different clients wouldn't deal with clubs unless they put release clauses in contracts, because he wanted the power to decide what the next move was. So when it came to different players, he wanted a £50 million release clause, because he knew that if another club came and hit that mark, then the club would have to accept, and then he would be free to then negotiate with that club. So I think that the Isak thing is a really tough situation now for Newcastle, and Mark has hit the nail on the head. You feel really, really sorry for Eddie Howe, because really he's caught in the crossfire. He didn't negotiate the deal with Isak. He's not sat on the board deciding what kind of valuation needs to be met before Isak is allowed to go. And ultimately, he's now shorn of his best player for a really crucial part of the season to make sure you get off to a decent start, and doesn't know whether you're going to have his best player for the rest of the season. Is he going to go in 2 weeks? Is he going to have the money to spend to invest in someone to replace him? It's a really difficult situation, and I don't know what Isak is thinking, really, because he must have an end game in mind. He must understand that if Newcastle don't accept a bid, he's either going to have to sit on the sidelines for an entire season and just not play, or at some stage reintegrate himself into the Newcastle squad. And I know for a fact that Newcastle probably is one of the hardest clubs to do that as a football player, given the passionate fan base up there. I really don't know what happens from this point. I think it's a really, really tough situation for Newcastle and how to handle it. And they'll feel like they're being backed into a corner. And at some stage, you're going to have to probably accept an offer that they just don't want to accept.
I mean, the irony in all this is that the player that they're looking at to possibly replace Alexander Isak is Johan Visser at Brentford, who is not wanting to play at the moment. His head's not right because he wants to go to Newcastle. So it's just the hypocrisy of it all, isn't it? There's just, look at Mark Way at Crystal Palace. He's made it clear that he's happy to stay until the end of the season. Club captain, won the FA Cup with them last season. But the chairman, Steve Parish, is saying it will be a problem for us if he goes on a free transfer next year. So, maybe try and sell him now. So loyalty it's a two-way street in football, but it depends which side of it you're on. Robin Van Persie obviously left Arsenal, has been vilified by their fans ever since. You can't really win, but, I know, James, I know you've got a point to make on Isak, so, far away.
Well, it's just to add a bit of context. I was speaking to a source who's very plugged into the market and recruitment, and he was telling me that there are multiple agents involved in this situation. And that's actually complicated the problem, because I think one of the agents involved with Isak has kind of promised that this deal would happen and it would be smooth and this is what you need to do to get out. And from what I'm told, a couple of the other agents who were involved in this were a little bit more, not sure it's going to be that straightforward. And I think what he's done is he's listened to an influential voice that's maybe promised more than they could deliver. Now, of course, the deal could end up happening, but where we are really is a stalemate at the moment, which is where Liverpool have put in a bid. And I thought it was quite interesting at the time that when that bid got rejected, it was very, very quickly briefed that they weren't going to bid again. And that was effectively saying, passing the baton over to Isak, the player himself, to say, right, you're going to have to kick up as much of a fuss as you can here to effectively lower your valuation to something closer to where we think, we're prepared to pay. Now, obviously, he's done that. And but Newcastle have so far shown no interest in being in negotiating, coming back to the table. So Liverpool haven't put in a second offer. Now, the way to resolve this is for Liverpool to just pay the money. Now, they might obviously not want to do that. They clearly feel 140, 150 is too much, and it is a huge amount of money for a player who, let's not forget, is brilliant, but is not guaranteed to be able to play 3 games a week for 10 months of the season. He has had a checkered injury problem in the past. Newcastle have had to manage that. And so you're not getting a player. It's not like when Arsenal bought Declan Rice, for example, when they paid that kind of money and they knew he had the tireless engine. He never gets injured. He's going to be able to play time after time after time after time. So I can understand why Liverpool it's not even lowballing. I just think they feel he's not quite worth as much as Newcastle do. But we've got to a point now where Liverpool, if they want to make this deal happen, they have to come back to the table at a higher level. Now, whether they come in at I don't know, 120, 125, maybe more money is guaranteed rather than add-ons. I think Isak can't do any more than he already has. So clearly the battle was passed to him at one stage to say, look, you need to help make this happen. He's done that. For better or for worse, that is what he's done. The ball is really now back in Liverpool's court, I think, to make an improved offer and to end this, because this sort of stalemate really isn't actually good for anyone. It's not good for Isak. It's clearly not good for Newcastle. And actually, it's not great for Liverpool because they're now into the season. They've obviously lost any kind of pre-season time to be able to work with him. They're going to have to try and integrate him as they're going along, which, of course, they're already doing with several other players. So it's not a sort of settled setup for Liverpool, this, and it's not really ideal for them either.
Conveniently enough, Newcastle's first home game of the season next Monday is against Liverpool. So I imagine that once that game is out of the way next Monday night, I think the Isak deal will probably accelerate. I can't imagine Isak signing for Liverpool before they play at St James's Park. That will be a little bit too much intensity before the game, but I think it'll happen. I'm not sure Liverpool need him right now. I think what they're doing is trying to kind of replace Mo Salah at some point. Salah, Firmino, Mane. Once they get Isak, Ekitike and Wirtz together, that could be their forward line for the next 5-6 years. But right now, guys, James, Rob, do you think that Liverpool need Alexander Isak?
Well, the thing is, yes, they do, because they've lost players at the top end of the pitch, tragically, obviously in one case, but also they've allowed Luis Diaz to leave and Darwin Núñez to go as well. And Isak is clearly an upgrade on both of those two. And I think, elite number nines are so rare these days in football that you can't really sort of pass your nose up at the opportunity to be able to get one in. And you've got a situation here where there is a number, it's a big number, but it's not a million miles away from where Liverpool are, that they can pay to get in somebody who, there's no guarantee, I suppose, of goals, but he's as close as you're going to get as somebody who will just come in and virtually guarantee 20, 25 goals a season. And he's entering the prime years of his career. The boost it would give the fans, the squad, the club as a whole, I just think it's a deal they have to get done. They'll be clear favourites to win the league if they're not already. And yeah, if I was a Liverpool executive, as I say, I think the onus is on them now to complete the deal, to up their offer and get it done.
And I think in terms of what the squad needs right now, you could probably make the case that they're in more need of a centre half or even a defensive midfield player. But I think James is right that sometimes these things come up and you don't get another chance to do it. And Isak really, in terms of number nines around the world, is probably about as perfect a fit for Liverpool as you can get. He's had a couple of years in the Premier League, has been highly successful in the Premier League, knows how to score goals in the league. There isn't anyone else in the running for his signature because most of the clubs have done their business. United have signed a centre forward, Chelsea have signed 2, Arsenal have signed their centre forward. In theory, they've got a clear run at him if they can come up with the money to meet Newcastle's valuation. If you wait a year, you never really know what's going to happen. Maybe there's another club that comes in and wants to sign him. Maybe there's a bit more competition. Maybe the price is even higher in 12 months. I think the way that Liverpool have operated in this window has suggested that they have got quite a clear long-term plan for how they want the squad to look at the end of this window, the next summer window, and even probably the window beyond that. And I think just because these opportunities to sign elite number nines don't come around very often, that they're probably thinking that it's really now or never for Isak. That if they're going to do it, it's got to be in this summer, even though, financially it'll be quite painful to do that and possibly Mark Gahey in the next sort of 2 weeks before the deadline.
Okay, so it's time for another break, but afterwards when we come back, we'll talk about Tottenham and the new era under Thomas Frank.
So Tottenham backed up what was an impressive performance, albeit in defeat, against PSG in the Super Cup with, again, an impressive performance on the opening weekend of the Premier League season against Burnley. James, I know you spent time with Spurs on tour, and we're also in Italy for that Super Cup tie. What have you made of Spurs so far under Thomas Frank? I appreciate this. We're dealing in kind of weeks rather than months, but have you been impressed so far, do you think?
Yeah, I think he's found the job a step up, certainly. in terms of the scrutiny that's on him. I mean, I was told that he likes to go for a run very early in the mornings, and he tried to do it at the team hotel, outside the team hotel in Hong Kong, and had to sort of be told by one or two of the executives, you might not be able to do this, as Tottenham manager, and not be bothered by people. You might be, it's fine. With all due respect to Brentford, if you come as Brentford manager, there aren't going to be as many people who know you. There's many more eyes on you here. So I think just little things like that where and I know that he went to one of the fan events when he was in Hong Kong, was kind of taken aback by just the number of people in the room and the enthusiasm and the sort of fandom for Spurs there. So I think there's a period of adjustment for him, but I think what will really encourage Tottenham fans is the fact that there's a clear sort of Thomas Frank imprint on the team already. They look a lot more organised defensively, set pieces, which I never understood. I quite liked Ange Postecoglou, I have to say, even though I, like many of us, were on the receiving end of some of his sharper comments at times. But the stick that beat with him so often was the fact that he sort of dismissed this idea of a set piece. Goes, why do we need it? What's the point? It's sort of farcical. There's so much, attention to it. Yes, we do work on it, but it doesn't have to be this big thing. And you just think, well, that's such an outlier with the sort of modern trend in the Premier League that every time they concede the goal from set piece, it's like, well, this is clearly something you need to work on. And yet you look at Tottenham now, and of course, both of their goals against Paris Saint-Germain came from set pieces. They were a constant threat. And they look just much better balanced. I mean, obviously, the sort of high-risk, high-line Postecoglou style was an extreme version of football that Thomas Frank didn't really have to do too much apart from drop the defensive line 25 yards, and suddenly you do look better balanced. But just in the way that they play, the way that they've the patterns of play, you can see, I'd be really encouraged if I was a Tottenham fan that he's having that impact already.
Right, so you say they'll be really encouraged if you're a Tottenham fan. I get that because Spurs are much more organised than they were last season under Ange. But I remember 2 years ago, the Tottenham fans fell in love with Ange, the way they played. And we know that Tottenham fans have a certain way of playing. They love playing a certain way. Now, I was watching the Super Cup against PSG, and I was kind of surprised by long throw-ins, goalkeeper taking free kicks from just outside the centre circle, lots of long balls, long diagonal passes forward. It's effective, but considering Tottenham fans are maybe unique in what they expect from their team, how long will it last before they start grumbling about the football?
Yeah, I mean, that is a valid criticism. I mean, it should be said that sort of part of the piece that there were 10 criteria that the Tottenham executives identified that they wanted in their candidates to succeed Postecoglou, and one of them was style of play. And they felt that Thomas Frank's style of play at football at Brentford was suitable for Spurs. So they feel he'll get there. And I thought it was quite interesting, actually, that when I spoke to him before his press conference before the Burnley game on Friday, and sort of asked him about how he felt they were going into the season. Were they ready, basically? And he said, well, look, defensively, there are principles of play that you can see, and we feel as though we've come a long way in a short period of time there. But he said, from an attacking point of view, and it's a different kind of game, I would say, to your point, Mark, that I think that was quite a specific game plan because they were playing the European champions. I'm not sure they'll always be on the back foot like that. And Thomas Frank is a very versatile, adaptable manager. That's a clear difference between him and Postecoglou, who, we are who we are, mate. We'll do what we do, and what will be. He's, Thomas Frank will devise specific game plans and adapt as necessary. But Thomas Frank was very clear in saying, look, from an attacking sense, we're not quite there. And there's a number of reasons for that. Of course, they've lost James Maddison to injury. They've not had Dejan Kulusevski for the whole of pre-season. And one of their leading targets, Morgan Gibbs-White, they thought they had got him over the line. And of course, he ended up signing a new deal at Nottingham Forest. So they're looking at, as I know Rob and I both reported, Savinho at City. They're trying to advance the deal for Eberechi Eze at Crystal Palace. They get one or both of those players, and it looks very different. I think Gyökeres has looked really good in the two games that he's played under Frank, and there's sort of something to build on there, definitely. But you can understand why that attacking sort of side of the game is not quite clicked yet. I think he will need a bit of time to get that right.
You just mentioned Eze there, James. I mean, where are Spurs up to with that? Is that a deal that you think is likely to get done? And is there any possibility? I know Arsenal have been linked with him in the past. That Arsenal swoop in out of nowhere and nick him from under Spurs' nose.
Yeah, it's possible because it's not done. But the noises I've heard over the weekend, speaking to somebody who's got knowledge of the deal, who sort of suggested that Tottenham are now the clear front runners to sign him. I think they've had, by the sounds of it, some positive noises from the players' side about wanting to come to Spurs, which again is not to say that if Arsenal suddenly appeared out of nowhere with a big money bid, and the valuation I think is still a bit of an issue. There was a release clause that expired earlier this month, which has obviously complicated things a little bit because it affects both parties' valuation of the player. But of course, if Arsenal came in with a big offer, then that would give Eze something to think about. It's obviously a team that's growing for the league, but both sides have Champions League football this season. Spurs obviously got the league win, so he would be playing in Europe's Premier competition. At the moment, it's not done, but Spurs are clearly ahead of everybody else, and I think there's a growing confidence among the sort of Spurs end that they are going to get this over the line.
Sorry, Tottenham fans, but is Eze not too good for Tottenham? Is he not? Does he not deserve has he not earned a move to a bigger club than Spurs? I mean, look, Spurs in the Champions League, I get it, but if you're looking at the clubs right now that are competing for the biggest honours, Spurs aren't one of them, are they? Spurs are a team that has got a long way to come back from last season. Eze is a really good player, England international, big part of Palace's FA Cup win last year. Look, if it's Arsenal v Tottenham for Eze, there's only one winner for me, and that's Arsenal. But I'm just surprised that he's not attracted bigger and better teams than Tottenham.
Yeah, well, I think the Palace's reluctance to sell was a factor, and remains so. I don't think it's an easy deal to do. They've obviously had, against their will, really had a significant churn of players. You think about Elise going, Anderson. You've got obviously Gay, probably going to go either this summer or certainly next. The indication there is that he's not going to sign a new deal sort of under any circumstances. And they obviously don't want that team that's won the FA Cup and has been so impressive under Glasner to sort of fall apart. But yeah, look, I mean, I suppose from Tottenham's point of view, this is where things like the stadium, the training ground, state of the art, all of that, and they can sort of say to him, look, you are going to be our main man, which of course Arsenal can't necessarily do that. It might appeal to him more to say, be a squad player at Arsenal, not play every week, or say to him at Tottenham, well, look, you can come in and you can be our number 10. You're going to, James Maddison's out for the season, and you can argue that Eze's an upgrade on Maddison anyway. But obviously Maddison's out for a long period of time. We need you to stitch this all together. We've got a manager in Thomas Frank who, I've been fortunate enough to spend a bit of time with Thomas Frank sort of away from football. And he is a really engaging character. I can see why players want to play for him. And he's the sort of guy who could convince someone like Eze who would have options to come and play for him. So I think you're being a little harsh on Spurs. I get the point, but it's an attractive package all in. And the other thing, of course, is that he's not going to be on huge wages at Palace. And, that's quite often the issue for Tottenham is they can't really shop at the top end of the market because they just don't pay the top wages. They can do that with Eze. They can give him a real big bump and still keep him within their wage structure. And incidentally, my sort of understanding is on the wage bill, because it's so well controlled, I think there's an ambition there to get a bit more aggressive with the wages going forward with Spurs. I think you'll see that over the next couple of years, that they are going to try and not necessarily go and get an Isak, and pay huge money, but I think that they're trying to pay their best players a bit more and then obviously become more attractive to new signings because they can offer more money in salaries.
Just sorry, Rob, before jumping on Savino, just a bit of context on Eze. The point is he's 27, so I think this is his big move, isn't it? This is his time for his big move, and at that age, I don't know. I just think he could find a bigger and better team, because at 27, you're not going to get another big move. But, I take your point. But, Rob, I know you want to ask James about Savino, so dive in.
Well, yeah, I mean, the message on Savino from City has been that they don't want to let him go. I know Pep was quite effusive about him in his news conference on Friday, saying that he wanted Savino to stay at City for many, many years. That said, we also know that City's policy with things like this is that if a player goes and knocks on the manager's door or Hugo Viana's door and says, I want to go, usually they're allowed to leave. City have sort of said that they would look for a fee that's in excess of £50 million. Do you think that Tottenham is it as a and Savino? Is it one or the other? Have they got the financial ability to go and do both those deals if it's going to be beyond sort of £100 million for the two of them?
Yeah, they can do both. They've got plenty of headroom with PSR, and as I say, obviously, wage bill is one aspect of that, and their wage bill is really tightly controlled. So they've got room to do both. And my understanding is that they do want to make at least 2 attacking signings before the window closes. So whether they get one or both of them remains to be seen. But yeah, look, I mean, we all know the interest is there. The other element, of course, is that there are a number of people who you can talk to if you want to do a deal at Spurs. I mean, there's Johan Lange, obviously, he's the technical director there. There's Thomas Frank, the manager, who's involved to some extent in the recruitment. There's Vinay Venkateshan, the new CEO, who's gone in there this summer. And also there's Fabio Paratici, who is, well, technically banned, but is able to act as a consultant for the club. Interesting that he was sat next to Johan in Udine, and he's been sort of a prominent presence. So I think he's somebody who, is playing an active role and is listening. And obviously we all know with transfers that, if you've got somebody connected to a club who's listening to a conversation or listening to offers or is sort of moving in those worlds, that's often where the interest starts to generate, and then people can kind of take it, to wherever they want to go. But look, they are interested in both. They could sign both, but as ever with Spurs, they have to pay the money, and there is a little bit of reluctance to do that. But there are at least now more voices in that conversation than just Daniel Levy holding the purse strings.
It's interesting with that one, the Savino one, because we were away with City at the Club World Cup, and there was obviously lots of talk at that time about Rodrigo at Real Madrid, and City had sort of suggested that he had been offered to clubs in the Premier League, City being one, just to kind of sound out whether there was any kind of interest. And City at that time were quite cool on that and kind of not fully backed away from it, but weren't really kind of bigging it up. Obviously, they weren't really expecting, or I doubt they were expecting Spurs to come in for Savino. But if Savino was to go, if Spurs were to meet their valuation and Savino was to go, you'd expect that Pep or Hugo Viana would want someone in to replace him, and that potentially would open up a route for Rodrigo to go from Real Madrid to Man City. Now, that deal would be very, very expensive. I think the numbers in Spain are kind of 100 million plus, and then his wage on top of that. But because of City's PSR position, it's probably a deal that they could do. And as good as Savino has been for his one season in the Premier League, and he probably was one of the only players to come out of last season with any kind of credit, because he was so young and it was his first year in the Premier League, and City fans and Pep loves him. I think a lot of City fans may look at that and think, well, actually, if there's a chance to get 50 plus million for Savino and reinvest that in Rodrigo, who is still a young player himself, and having seen what he's been able to do for Real Madrid, it's maybe two deals that City fans would look at and think, well, that's actually works in our favour a little bit, that a City attack that has Rodrigo, Haaland, Phil Foden, Doku, Reinders, Ryan Shirky coming off the bench, it is even more formidable than it is already. And I think some City fans may look at that and think they're quite hopeful that those two deals may get over the line.
Okay, so we've got 2 weeks to the window closes. Next week is going to be hotting up. It with the day after Newcastle against Liverpool week when we chat again. So we'll call it a day for now. But next week we'll talk more about the transfers that we expect to happen before the window closes. But until then, see you later.